Hello and welcome. We are discussing the results of our annual research into the Banker's Top 1000 World Banks. I'm Silvia, Pavoni, economics editor of The Banker. We are going to look into Latin America, but first I'm here with Joy Macknight, editor of The Banker. And Joy, before talking about Latin America, we're going to talk a little bit about banking globally. So how tough has it been this year?
So the Banker's Top 1000 World Bank ranking actually covers banks from 102 countries around the world. So we definitely have an idea of the health and the wealth of the global banking industry. And to be honest, it's not that bad. This year, on aggregate, the banks in the top 1,000 have managed to add 13% to Tier 1 capital, bringing it up to $9.9 trillion, which is pretty impressive. They also added 16% to their total assets and also 17% to their deposit base. Again, pretty good. But of course, they did take a hit in profitability. So across the world, the aggregate profits dropped by 18%. But if you think about it, that's not that bad compared to the global financial crisis, which saw a contraction of like 85%. Let's talk about Latin America. You know, how did the banks in the region's biggest economies fare in the past year?
It's interesting that you mentioned the profit hit that banks globally on an aggregate level took during the financial crisis, because of course that was a crisis very much about banking. While this crisis affected, I think, banks in markets that maybe didn't suffer as much during the financial crisis, potentially more. So in Latin America, the banking story is very much the economy story. And in just looking at Brazil, which is the region's largest economy, and of course the largest banking market, the economy dived by 4.1%, which is the biggest drop in 4 decades. If we look at Mexico, there the situation is even worse, because in percentage terms, the recession was twice as big as that of Brazil. But even in other relatively big banking markets in Latin America, such as Colombia, things were a little bit challenging. And so the picture obviously wasn't good. What helped all of these banks were these big government support schemes and forbearance programs, which meant that NPLs, non-performing loans, generally didn't really spike. It remains to see what's going to happen this year.
Okay, but what were the main pain points across the region?
So it varies according to the country. Some countries reacted to the crisis more promptly, some others less so. For example, in Mexico, there was a really slow response to the crisis, which meant the lockdowns had to be prolonged, came in later. The vaccination rollout is also being much slower, which means that analysts now are concerned that although there are signs of the economy picking up, the consumer confidence and credit demand may remain weak. Again, you also see issues related to investor and consumer confidence elsewhere in the region.
Okay, and obviously the Top 1000 World Bank's ranking is based on a final end-of-year results for 2020. You know, what do you think this year will hold for the banks?
So again, it varies. In Colombia, for example, where the second payment relief program ended just now in June, we're recording this in June. We may see the results of that in terms of non-performing loans later on this year. For some other countries, like in Mexico, that ended at the end of last year, and so we potentially going to see banks taking a hit earlier when we look again at their data at the end of this year. Generally, the banks that we've seen performing a little bit better, and particularly in Brazil, were the ones that were a little bit more detached maybe from the broader banking market, like BTG Pactual, which is the one that performed the best. So as part of our analysis, we don't just look at the size of banks, but also at a combination of indicators that point to how well they've done, compared to their performance the previous year. So BTG Pactual is a bank that focuses on investment banking and therefore perhaps avoided some of the pains that other banks that looked at a broader set of customers had to deal with. And actually, in relative terms, it increased their deposits by much more than the countries and the region's leader, Itaú Unibanco, did, of course, starting from a very different and low basis. So that's something that perhaps is going to continue to be positive for the banks that focus on those markets. But again, the ones that will continue to focus on the broader retail and broader corporate banking sectors, their fate will continue to be very much linked to the one of the economy.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your insights, Silvia.
Thank you.